throughout the 12 hours plus that they will be open every day. And we will be playing that by ear. We'll be flexible in how those water collection sites work, just as we do with other operations during the festive season. We will adjust the closing times depending on the need. The goal is to keep them open for only those hours that is necessary, but if they need to run 24 hours, that is a possible outcome, and we are able to sustain that. Nobody presents themselves at a water collection point will be asked to pay for water, and nobody will be turned away. There is no accreditation or identification required. Those processes will simply slow down the water collection, and it must be understood that that this mechanism itself is internally regulating. There is only so much water you can carry away. A 25-litre water can weighs around 25 kilograms, and there are a few people who can carry away more than that. One is able to collect for oneself 25 litres, and as a proxy on behalf of others, up to a maximum of 100 litres. This means that nobody is likely to be able to abuse the system very much, because they will be required to go and queue again if they want to collect more than that, and the mechanism will internally regulate without being excessive and barring people from access based on some form of identification, which some people may not have or may lose, and that will snarl up the speed of the collection system. The water collection points are range in size, but they have anywhere between 50 and up to 600 taps at a collection point. So it is unlikely that, I think in the minds of some people, they see a very small number of taps with people fighting for water. It certainly is not the case with 400 plus taps at many of the larger collection sites. There will be ample points for people to fill up. We are also making arrangements with donors and suppliers of containers. So in the event that somebody is absolutely incapable of bringing their own water container, the possibility exists that we will be able to supply such containers. The water collection points will be both pedestrian and vehicular in nature, mostly a combination of both, some only pedestrian and some only vehicular, based on the topography and the layout of the site and the constraints imposed by the location of each site. So there are a lot of imponderables at this stage that make it difficult for us to say exactly how these sites will work. One would like to say that you can conceive every possible eventuality, but we know from previous experience that the public will do things their own way. It is not possible to predict exactly where people will use sites, where they will collect from, whether they will choose to collect immediately after work or go home and collect from the water collection point nearest their home. And because of those variables that are impossible to estimate, we will be in a situation where, as the pods roll out, and their rollout will be gradual, that we will need to adapt our strategy and we will need to be flexible enough. We're always constantly listening to the good ideas that are coming to us all the time, and fresh ideas are being presented about how we may improve the situation, and we will remain open to all those suggestions and make sure we factor them in. There it is at the moment, we can't tell you exactly what the kind of containers will be that people are likely to bring. One hopes that everybody brings a 25-litre can, but it is entirely possible that some people will bring a collection of much smaller containers that will need to be filled. So we have thought carefully about how many people can go through the facilities and whether we can get the kind of volumes through each one that is required, but that will depend on the time taken per person. The estimates of 5 minutes per person that we've allowed for should be enough, but in the case of people with special needs or otherwise, that might be complicated. As such, there will be ample hands on deck at each site to ensure that there are people to assist, and in the next week you will see us go out to call for assistance for vulnerable users. We will introduce the email addresses at the end of the presentation, where organizations, Rotarians, ratepayers associations, civic associations, neighborhood watchers and others are able to volunteer their effort. We have seen in the past that when you put Cape Townians under pressure, we don't fragment, we don't go to war, we pull together. We are still distributing donations from the last major fire round of donations that were given. The public in Cape Town can be incredibly collegial and collaborative when they want to be. We know what cooperation looks like, and I am anticipating that, as with other major events in the history of the city, including the World Cup, we will see people pull together under these circumstances, volunteer their time, and we will help to connect those who want to volunteer to take water to vulnerable users with those who need to use their services, so that no person is in a position where they cannot. Larger facilities that need access to water and where the occupants are unable to queue for water, such as with frail care centres, will through prior arrangement be able to make arrangements with the city to collect or to have their water delivered by tanker or otherwise, and these are the logistical arrangements we will now start making with all users. Many people have applied their minds to the security situation at the water collection points, and I can tell you that not only will the city's health services be present at all of them to ensure that first aid and basic life support is present, along with our emergency services and disaster volunteers and a variety of other volunteers, but we will also have a significant presence of our own traffic, law enforcement and Metro Police present. This will be supplemented substantially by SABC and the South African National Defence Force, who have committed in writing to be present. That decision taken at the NAT joints, and they are committed to supporting our efforts in terms of keeping these sites safe. The sites have been graded as low, medium and high risk, depending on the community and the circumstances in which they exist. And that means you can have from as little as 12 or 20 staff at a site, which is low risk, to as much as 70 people at a site or more, depending on the security situation at those sites, and to make sure that residents are able to use the site without interference and do so efficiently and quickly. So at this stage, I want to say that I feel that whilst we are facing an unprecedented challenge, never in the history of our city have we had to face a challenge like this. It is the worst recorded drought in recorded history. It is a 1 in 400-year incident. It is something which you cannot plan for. It is something that the water augmentation schemes of national government, which had planned their next augmentations around 2022, had not foreseen and had not provided for. The city will do everything it can to make sure that augmentation takes place and that we avoid a day zero scenario. But the most powerful weapon we have at this stage is for residents to reduce their consumption dramatically. Do not waste water. You will see that last week we initiated our water blitz, enforcement blitz, and that earlier this week staff went out and started dealing with water wasters who simply have not gotten the message. People still washing out wheelie bins on sidewalks or running car washes or otherwise squandering what is now a very precious resource. And for those people, they will see the sustained enforcement action of the city to make sure that those residents who are saving meticulously are not confronted daily by the reality of some other people simply squandering the water that they have saved. So we will do everything to avert a day zero scenario, but the main power at this stage is in the hands of our residents across the city, and it is their ability to save water that will help us prevent a day zero scenario. If it happens, I am confident that we can do so efficiently, competently and safely, but we understand that it will inconvenient and it will have impact for businesses. Later this week, we will present to you the range of areas that will remain on the reticulation system and those areas that will be off. The bulk of the city will see their reticulation shut down, around 75% of the city, but areas of very high density and critical infrastructure, informal settlements who are effectively already pods, already water collection points because they have standpipes, and areas of significant commercial and industrial importance will remain connected, because the alternative of deepening the crisis by also putting pressure on businesses and which may end in people not earning salaries during that time, would make the crisis so much worse. So it is quite important that we try and retain water connections for those areas where substantial industrial and commercial activity is taking place and where people are employed. With this, I will hand over to Richard Bosman so that he can present to you the visuals around the plan, which may help deepen the understanding.
Thank you, Alderman. Are you going to move up? Are you going to stay here? Move up, Click? It's up to you. You want to move up? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Alderman Smith. Again, just to echo the message of Alderman Smith and Alderman Hilson, our best option is to save water. We don't want to get to day zero. Just in terms of our water plan, you can see we've got phase 1, which is the preservation restrictions or rationing, and then phase 2 are disaster restrictions. Phase 1, that is where we are now, is what we're doing. And I think it's important that I just mentioned to you, and Councillor Limbeck easier, that this has been done every day. Water rationing through throttling, limiting supply and advanced pressure management, every day it's been done. My colleague in the pink shirt, as he said to me, Pierre Maritz is here, he'll be able to answer any questions on that. That has been done every day, which is resulting in some localized water outages at times. Leak detection, an important component of this is leak detection as well as repairs. Treated effluent system augmentation, the water management devices where we are restricting water flow to residences for a daily basis. Our pressure management is also having a huge impact, could be saving up to 20-30 million litres of water a day. And then, of course, a big drive for us is going to be the issue around enforcement, where there's blatant wastage of water. The public have become much more concerned about this. We're getting much more complaints on a daily basis. So people are becoming more indignant about it, and that's also assisting us. I think the purpose is to prevent us escalating to phase 2, the disaster restrictions. Alderman Smith mentioned it earlier, save or queue. It's a very simple statement, but it's an important statement to make. And then to prevent our daily water use from exceeding predefined limits. The less we use every day, the longer we push out our day zero, and it allows us more time for the rains to come and also for the augmentation schemes to come on board. Phase 2, disaster restrictions. What is our trigger point? As mentioned earlier, when our dam capacity reaches 13.5%, which implies day zero, the dam levels are monitored each and every day by our technical staff in water services. Once we declare day zero, the water supply to residential areas will be severely reduced or cease, which in essence means your taps will be switched off. Water supply to core businesses and critical infrastructure institutions, such as hospitals, will continue as far as possible. And then your daily water use will be actively controlled through the distribution of water to residents through localized water collection points, or WCPs, across the city. Supply will be maintained to informal settlements. And we're revisiting the whole issue around the informal settlements, especially when there's large-scale abuse, and we are looking at our position on that. Purpose is to stretch our existing water supply. Again, less water we use, we push day zero out on a weekly basis. And also to minimize the impact on human life and jobs. We have a lot of industry in Cape Town that relies on water on a daily basis, and the idea is that we do not want these places shut down, people not earning salaries. It will just extend and make the economic hardships worse. Our water collection points, our strategic economic nodes, critical infrastructure, national key points, and informal settlements remain connected. Residential areas are predominantly disconnected, and we have approximately 180 water collection points at this site. As mentioned by Alderman, we could be pushing this up to 200. Criteria for selection of the locations. It wasn't just a thumb suck. There's a lot of technical criteria used. One of the most important, what is the connection to the core reticulation system? All the water points have to be connected to our core water system to enable us to keep that section on. Large enough space to accommodate pedestrian and vehicle water collection, have safe access and egress for public parking and pedestrian, and most importantly also safety and security considerations. These have to be safe places for people to be able to come either early in the morning or after hours to collect water. The design of the site is a provision of water for approximately 20,000 persons, 25 litres per person. We're looking at a throughput of about 10 to 15, 13 persons, between 1,500 water outlets, vehicle and pedestrian options for collection. Some of you might have attended the demo that took place in Maitland last year in November. We're looking at bulk water collection points for organizations delivering to the vulnerable. I'd just like to mention to you that we've actually been approached by quite a few organizations who've indicated they're quite happy to deliver to the old age organizations on our behalf, free of charge, if they can just tie up with us. And we're starting that arrangements next week. On-site toilets and refuse management and lighting. You'll see here's a picture of Mr. Pillay standing. This was the setup in Maitland in Royal Road towards the end of November. And this is how people will be walking through. You'll see there's a stand. It's got two pipes on either side with a 25-litre canister. Joint operations with national and provincial government. Definitely safety and security deployment and collaboration with SABC and the NDF. And that joint instruction has been issued from the national level for SAPS and the SANDF to assist the city. They've been part of our planning already prior to the instruction being issued. This was just a formal confirmation from them. There will be a venue operations centre at each of the facilities with law enforcement, traffic, city officials, volunteers, queue marshals, first aid points. We're looking at light regulations. Officials on site asked to monitor abuse. Public also asked to assist to report abuse. The deployment will be in line with the risk assessment. Some of them will have risk rating than the others. And there will be a phased approach. We will build in flexibility with regard to operating hours. If we see at 8 o'clock, parts are still very busy, people are collecting water, we will be extending the hours in order to allow that to take place. Just a picture of Venue Operations Centre. This was the centre that took place at the Maitland facility. This was staff and volunteers. We've got a huge amount of people in our disaster management section. Over 400 were prepared to volunteer for this. But we've also taken this a step further. And on the 10th of February, we're having a mass information session with all the neighbourhood watchers and CPFs. And we're going to ask to draw them in to manage and to assist at their local pods and to take ownership of it. Disaster plan call to action, NGOs, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, international organizations. I can tell you we've had contact with NGOs, community-based organizations and faith aid coming to us and saying, guys, how do we help you? How can we assist you? And we'll start those engagements in earnest this week. Looking at the vulnerable groups, especially old age homes and those sort of things, we look at dealing with them in a different way. From a safety and security, we've got neighbourhood watchers, community police uniforms. I'd just like to say a lot of the neighbourhood watchers have actually come to the city and said, you know, you guys have trained us. Why can't we be used to manage the pods in our areas to assist you? That will actually multiply our numbers and make it much easier. And again, the message, save water now to avoid day zero. Just an example of the signage at a facility, signage of bulk, disabled collection point. This was at the facility that we had set up in Maitland. A signage there is a pedestrian facility where pedestrians will be pushed through. There will be a basic first aid point at the facilities. This is our staff and volunteers. Our volunteers even took leave on their own time during that day just to be part of the process. Thank you. If there's any questions, we'll be happy to field it from our side.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so we will take 3 questions at a time, please. As far as possible, limit your questions to the Day Zero operational plan. Please introduce yourself and say where you're from and then who your question is directed at. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, Tashriq from Radio 786. Just a few questions. I think, Richard, the immediate question would be, where will these sites be? The 200, if you could give us an indication. I don't think we have the time to run through all 200, but when that list will be published. Then also about the average amount of people you're expecting to queue. At a time, I think it was mentioned now 20,000. Maybe just because if you already look at what's happening in Newlands with the people queuing for water, it seems quite chaotic. So maybe if you could just give us some more details where that's concerned. Then what sort of indications are there? How long do we expect this to go on for? If day zero arrives, with, again, concerns about less rainfall than usual, can we pull through for the next few months with the water that we have left? So how long do we expect this type of shock to be in motion? And then lastly, perhaps just implications for the reticulation system. I asked this question because before the notion of water shedding had been considered, and I think, Xanthi, you spoke about this quite extensively, that if you switch off, you could destroy or compromise the infrastructure. With day zero and parts of the reticulation system now being switched off, can we see greater amount of compromise to the reticulation system? Because more and more listeners are coming to us every day to complain about water leaks, to complain about pipe bursts, etc. Can we see that happening? And is the amount that's being reported now due to pressure being reduced quite a bit? Thanks so much.
First of all, I think we're looking from about now until the end of June, I would say. And I think once day zero kicks in, based on what Alderman Smith said, between 13.5% to 5% to 10%, we're looking at a 3-month period. During that time, more augmentation schemes will come on board. We should get better rain. So we were looking at that on that sense. Just in terms of throughput, we said about 20,000 people per pod based on the numbers. We were looking at between 10 and 15,000 a day. Newlands, yes, I've seen what you're talking about in Newlands. Remember, we have in a control site. Parts of the reticulation system will be switched off, so that area will have greater pressure. And we've worked out the mathematical formula, so we'll be able to fill up much faster based on the hoses. If you go to Newlands, there's more of a trickle that's coming out. You're talking about actual pressure coming from hoses in that sense. So I think that's important to tell you that. In terms of the list of sites, that's in the process of being finalized. We should release this for the latest by the end of this week. We already have 149 that we've seen as acceptable after assessment. There are just some that we had to relook at because the initial design was a desktop design, then there was actual field inspections to the sites over a 2-week period, and based on that we felt some of them needed to be changed, so we should have the list finalized by the end of this week, and we'll then publish it so people could see in which area it is, and that's part of the strategy to allow the neighbourhood watchers to take ownership of that to some extent. Okay, I think that's important. Just in terms of the network, I think Pierre, if maybe you could just pick up on that, Pierre. I know you guys have an extensive program of fixing and leak detection and that, so maybe Pierre could pick it up, please.
Good morning, everyone. Basically, you must see it in context. The city got about over 11,000 kilometers of pipe, 78,000 valves that needs to be turned, and great consideration must be given on how do you turn off valves to make sure that you give supply to a pot, for example. And by actioning valves, you get what we call in the industry sweet leaks. So it manifests as water on the surface in the valve chamber. And currently, our current workload on average a day is about 400 actions. So roughly, if you look at pressure management, the water management devices, leak detection, repairs, we action about on average 18,000 per month. That's 18,000 spanners that's being turned. So to answer your question on the implications of the infrastructure, obviously we are very responsible in that regard. We try to manage it as close as possible to 1 meter of water in the system. So we don't want our reticulation system be at negative pressures, because the problem is when you put on water again, you get what technical naming for that is water hammer, and that's just introducing velocity into the pipelines that compresses air. As soon as air compresses, pipes can fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Richard, any other questions?
And I just top up with that. Tashrik, the 200 sites, we're about 186 now with a reasonable degree of assessment, or that are assessed. At the beginning of, during last week, we had 149 concluded. That figure has moved up to 186. The 14 sites that still remain will be done by the end of this week, and we will be able to release a press release to you. How long those sites run depends obviously entirely on when day zero kicks in. If we save water now, and we save above the current usage levels, or we use less than the current usage levels, it is possible that we can see through this period all the way till the point where the other augmentation scheme starts expanding our water supply, or the winter rainfalls start. So it is possible that the day zero scenario could be as little as a few days, a few weeks, or if we do not see significant savings, it could last for as long as 3 months. That is the scenario nobody wants, and so hence our diligent calls for people to save water. We estimate that it will take around 5 weeks to set up all the 200 pods, which means that before activation, we will have to start rolling out these, and in anticipation of that trigger point, we'll have to start rolling them out. You can't just start building them when you call for them to be opened, and it will take about 2 weeks to shut down the reticulation system, possibly a little bit longer. And those two periods will overlap, so you'll start building about 3 weeks before you pull the trigger on the pods. You will start building them, and you'll carry into the period after day zero, and it will take you some time to shut down. So by the time you shut down the last of reticulation network, the last pods are being built. And the reason for that is that you don't want the pods to stand unattended for too long. The longer they stand unattended, the more chance for vandalism or theft or other problems. And the more security, of course, you have to deploy, all of which ratchets up the cost, which will start at least 200 million rand for the cost of those pods, and subject to the various variables that you can't now fully foresee, could expand from there. Newland Springs is, of course, a very different scenario. That is not a site controlled by the city, and it's in an extremely congested and awkward environment. I have, by the way, been in an on-site meeting there with officials, and we are looking at how we can improve that situation. It is, at the moment, has quite a negative impact on the local old age home and residents, because they say the collection happens all throughout the night, which is injurious to the people living there.
Thank you, Alderman. All right, so let's go Graham and then Lady Graham.
Thank you very much, Graham Robin here from Heart FM News. First of all, just want to find out, I know that you guys are going to say that you're going to give us more detail later in the week, but I think a lot of people really want to hear about shutting off water around the CBD, and that the CBD will be exempt. Where is the boundary for that? I think a lot of people are saying, are kind of confused. The people living in Woodstock or in District 6 area, are they still going to have water? Is that still part of the CBD? Can you just give us a bit of a faint outline in terms of a boundary? Up until which point are people in Green Point, Sea Point still going to have water in their homes, or is it just the businesses? And then second question, JP, I know you touched on this, and that's the frail care centres, but a lot of Cape Townians concerned. I'm getting tweets now about people asking about, old people queuing in lines, frail care centres. I know you touched on that, old age homes. Can you just elaborate a little bit more there? Thank you.
Morning, I'm Jenny Evans from News 24. Can you please tell us why water shops are allowed to sell municipal water if everybody else is being rationed? Do they have special licenses, and are there limits on what they can sell? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is mine, but... Oh, can you hear me all right? Marilise van der Merwe from Daily Maverick. I wanted to ask a more general question. How well prepared are you, do you think, or how prepared in general are you for a very sudden transition to waterless sanitation? Because I think that's also a big concern for people.
Thank you very much. Over to the panel.
First of all, the issue around the CBD area. First, let me say that we are looking at this stage to try to keep all industrial and commercial areas open. We are busy with an exercise on that matter. Again, it also depends how long, when day zero actually takes place, how long we anticipate it's going to be. There's a great deal of variables that we'll only be able to know closer to the time. So in the best scenario for us is that we are able to keep all the business areas open. But we will also have a process of having to shut them down if the situation got worse. The definition of what the CBD area is something that's defined in terms of the underlying water network. It's not, we can't go and say defined it by this bound, this road and that road. It depends on the existing zoning in the network. So I think if you please just give us some time at this stage, we will give a full definition of this when we've completed our work on the fuller understanding of all of the business areas. In terms of waterless sanitation, that certainly is an area that we're giving a lot of attention to. It is a great deal of concern to us. We don't want it to become waterless. I think we want to ensure that we are able to flush the sewers. So there's a number of ways we're looking to do that. One is we always fight against groundwater and stormwater infiltration into sewers. We're going to be turning that on its head right now. We're going to want stormwater infiltration into our sewers. So we're looking at where we're suitable to assist with that. We will also be looking, using tankers, for example, any other mechanism we have to use other non-potable water to assist us to flush sewers. There's been a very extensive study done on our sewage system. We know which the sewers are that are greatest risk. Ones are very flat grades, for example. So we have that detailed information of where we can anticipate where the problems might arise. So that's obviously with the public side of the sewer network. Difficulties will obviously also be on the side of on private properties, ensuring that those sewers are flushed correctly. Having 25 litres a day of potable water is probably not going to be enough. People will need their water for their human needs, their basic needs. We are looking to see every mechanism that can be implemented to assist on that. So, clearly those households with boreholes, for example, well points, our appeal is that water is used for such purposes as flushing toilets and sewers. We are looking into, and I'm not giving any undertaking yet, we're looking into people's access to other non-potable water sources. That's work in progress. We are also giving consideration to seawater. That is, usually we would not want seawater because it's very corroding of our system. But if this is going to be for a very limited time from 1 day to 3 months is kind of the range we have that this is possible. Particularly those parts of the city that drain to the sea outfalls. We are looking at the possibility of allowing seawater in there. Clearly, the rest of the city's sewer system that drains to treatment plants, we really can't have seawater because that is going to destroy the biological action in our treatment plants. So again, what many people may perceive as being a problem having seawater outfalls, in this case it turns on its head and becomes in fact the most suitable place where we can find solutions to. Obviously, if anyone does go down to the sea or a river or anything to abstract water, we would appeal for people to take great care with all the risks that there might be in that. So again, we are looking into this in greater detail, and once we have a good handle on that, we will come back and discuss that further. I think JP can deal with the water shops.
The water shops, I'll follow on.
Maybe just to give some feedback around the sale of water, the city's water inspector teams have been going out to these shops where water is being sold, and in many instances it's been found that they're selling potable water, and so action will be taken against these shop owners. The water inspector team are also visiting further stores throughout today. It is illegal, obviously, to sell water without being a registered vendor of the city and without having the necessary water trading licenses. And so our water inspector teams are very much aware of this trend, and we are taking serious action against these particular suppliers.
Perhaps if I can just swing that around and say that again, the public have the greatest power in this regard. If you're going to a water shop and buying water, ask them where they're getting the water. If the water is simply coming to you from a pipe connected to a tap in the back of the water shop, you're not...
Just coming out of the water crisis briefing currently taking place in Cape Town. So the main highlights there will be rolled out in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be water rationing. Phase 2 will, of course, be water restrictions and disaster management. It could possibly last up to 3 months. For now, though, let's cross over to water and sanitation. Nomvula Mokonyane is also currently addressing the Cape Town Press Club on the water crisis in Cape Town. Let's cross live.
eThekwini, and I'm told that some of the experts from eThekwini
Pierre's actually the manager of sanitation, but he's got broad-ranging experience, and Pierre will give you some of the interventions they're doing on the sanitation system just to pick up and not to have a shutdown of the system.
Thank you. No, basically, Alderman Smith covered it, and Deputy Mayor. But sanitation is a well-kept secret under the ground. And normally people don't want to talk about it. But once if you apply your mind to it, it's a very interesting engineering field. And strange enough, what we've also done 5 years ago, we was investigating how to keep water and groundwater out of the reticulation system. What we're doing now is to use that base flow to keep the system going. So that's basically all that I can add to it.
Thank you, Pierre. Okay, the lady in the black shirt, Tashreeq, then you, and then the lady in black and white.
Good morning. The lady in the black shirt comes from Germany. And as you know, the Germans love Cape Town. There are loads of them here. But in Germany, travel agents are getting a lot of calls now. Obviously, the news has traveled that Cape Town is not so well. Is it time to tell Germans not to come? I know you're trying to protect business, but is it time to come? I'll leave this open to whoever wants to answer. And secondly, as a resident in Cape Town myself, I noticed there's a new tune that's coming from the city, basically making the citizens more responsible. 60% of the citizens of Cape Town have not been saving. Are you on purpose increasing the pressure on the citizens? And is it really their fault, or shouldn't there be a bit of a political owning up as well?
Thank you, Tashreeq.
It's actually two follow-ups from the answers that came from the floor there. The one is, if those water shops are operating illegally, why this morning are they not shut? I mean, we're spending another day of them providing water. So by when can we see action being taken more than just a fine being slapped on them? And then, JP, just a follow-up to your earlier answer to me, which was about the cost of all of this. I speak under correction. I think you mentioned 200 billion rand. Can you give us an indication of where this money is coming from? I don't think it was really budgeted for. And I juxtapose this with the political hot potato, and that is where money is going to come from for desalination and all of those other things, because as Musi and as the political heads have been saying, that there isn't simply this type of money available for desalination. So where is this 200 billion rand coming from?
Good morning, Peter from Times Live. On the issue of proxies and people getting water from the collection points on behalf of someone else, how will that go? What form of consent do they need to present at these collection points to say that they are collecting water on behalf of someone else? Thank you.
Right, I will deal first the questions from Germany. Well, we don't want to say to people, don't come. I think the key issue is this. We have a very mixed economy in Cape Town. There's a great deal of different sectors. Virtually every single sector in every industrial and commercial sector uses water to some or other extent. So currently, with water demand around 600 million litres a day, 350 million litres of that demand comes from households, and 250 million litres a day comes from commerce and industry. So, I mean, they are a very significant part of the water use. So, although the public discourse is very strongly about how people in residential circumstances need to save water, we also need to speak around how commerce and industry needs to save water. And we have been engaging many businesses over many months now, over the past year and more, to speak to them, and there's been a very good response from most of them in terms of finding ways to cut down water consumption. And I must say, all I can say is thank you very much to those industrial people in the city and commercial businesses of the efforts that you've put in, because really it has helped a lot. And again, we go to appeal to them too. They must continue to find ways to cut down on their consumption in order to produce. But we need to keep the economy of Cape Town going. We can't crash this economy, even in the circumstances of day zero. So it's very important that we keep going and that we find ways, more and more efficient ways to use water in every single industry, and that will go for the tourism industry as well. We need to keep the tourism industry going as well. You can't just shut it down and expect it just to start up again. So I would not put out the message, don't come. I would say, please come, but when you come, please recognize the local circumstances and join in with us in the way that you operate and to save water.
So line up and get the water that you need to shower, because otherwise tourists are showering and Cape Townians are lining up to get water.
Well, Cape Townians also need jobs. We can't. This is a very difficult balance that we are seeking to achieve here. But the tourism industry provides a lot of jobs in the city. So, the issue is not to shut the economy down, but to find ways to make it more efficient. That's the general approach across the board, and I hope we can do that. I'll come to the the question of the money. The number quoted was 200 million rand, not billion rand. Okay. So, the question, where's the money?
If you have the spare zeros, don't you?
Yeah.
Please do bring them,
Yes, but something in front of the zeros, please. And you question, where's the money for desalination? Well, at this stage, all of the money for all of the projects we're running and intend to run are coming out of the city budget and are being paid for by the citizens of the city in terms of their water tariffs and rates and whatever is necessary. And of course, it also means that some other things have to be delayed a bit in order to ensure that we have the funding to run these projects. We would very much like national government, who are, as I think even national government admits, they are the ones responsible for the provision of bulk water, that they should be funding this, because Cape Townians pay a great deal of tax. There's far more tax paid to the national government than is paid to the city by Cape Townians. You just look at the numbers. The general tax that goes out of Cape Town is probably of the order of 150 billion rand, whereas what comes to the city, our budget is only 40 billion rand. Very little, not perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of that 150 billion rand that goes out to the national fiscus comes back into our economy. So we believe we are due that they do that, and that really is where it should be happening. But because they're not stepping up to the plate and they're not doing what they should be doing, we're not going to allow the city to collapse. And so, unfortunately, at this stage, it has to come from our citizens.
To add around the issue of tourism, and to echo what the Deputy Mayor just said, I think last year already we led a very active campaign around tourism, where we said we encouraged tourists to come and visit Cape Town, but when you do so, save like a local. So that does not necessarily mean queuing at pods, but it essentially means complying with the level of restriction at that given point in time. So at that particular time when we launched the communications campaign, the water restrictions required everyone to use no more than 87 litres per person per day. And as we implement level 6B, which requires 50 litres per day, that is what we're asking tourists to do, to come and enjoy the beauties and the wonders that Cape Town has to offer, but to ensure that you save like a local and contribute and form part of the city attempting to ensure that we reduce our overall consumption. And if you look across the world where there's been severe drought, international best practice is demand management. That is the most effective way to ensure any major city gets through a drought. The city is also obviously augmenting our supply, despite the fact that this is not our government, our constitutional competency. We have not just put the pressure on our citizens. We have indicated that we have a plan in place to augment our supply to ensure that we mitigate the impact of any future droughts. And in this way, we are calling on that joint partnership. The city continues to work on additional supply, despite the fact that this is national government's job. But at the same time, we need that social compact to continue and residents to contribute to further savings in order to us to truly defeat this drought.
Thank you, Councillor.
It also depends entirely on where the establishment is. If it's in an area, if it's an hotel within a portion of the city that remains on the reticulation network initially, it might carry on getting water, in which case, save like a local. You will find that in the bath plugs have been removed by the hotel. They're asking their visitors to be frugal. If it's an area outside, the facility, the guest house or whatever may not have water, and the owners will be making arrangements or bringing water or collecting water on behalf of the visitors. So I think you're looking for then a slightly more adventurous variety of German tourists and from elsewhere. I think Edie Bosman will talk to the issue of the water shops and the legal opinion we're getting. And then if I can just speak to the issue of the proxies. We have purposefully gone for a regulation light option, for a scenario that does not require people to carry identification, to have South African ID documents or rates accounts, because in each case you will find people who are not equipped as such. You'll find people who don't have an ID book, who have lost an ID book, who don't pay, who are not the recipient of the rates bill, but are perhaps a tenant or a backyarder. And once you start imposing those, it becomes an incredibly difficult job. Water is a basic right. And if you're going to start denying people the right to collect water, you're going to get into very tricky territory. So the right answer is not to regulate, or at least very light regulation, by ensuring that nobody comes there with 1,000 litres worth of containers and fills them up. People who need to collect on behalf of a guest house or on behalf of a facility that has many more occupants need to make prior arrangement with the city and make special arrangements for such water delivery or acquiring that water. The officials on site will protect against the worst abuses. It is the most likely place where such abuse may take place are with the vehicular pods, where people might try and bring in much larger water tankers to fill, and where the officials will have to use their discretion in terms of preventing any abuse or exploitation of the system. In the background, we have started exploring alternatives, IT alternatives. A lot of people have a cell phone or would be able to get a barcode or otherwise printed to them or issued to them. So we're looking at IT alternatives. If in the beginning of the process we see that we are picking up serious problems and that Cape Townians are not exhibiting the level of cooperation that we hope and anticipate, then we might have to resort to more intensive regulation. And we're not waiting to that point to start preparing for those scenarios. We're starting to do it now, but I don't believe that will be necessary. I don't believe that will be necessary to start with some form of accreditation for access to the sites. Richard, do you want to speak to the water shops?
Just a bit on what Alderman said. I mean, if somebody comes with 100 litres, you'll see that's within line. If you come with a 1,000-litre canister, you ain't going through there. It's as simple as that. So I think it's important that I tell you that. And where people are collecting on guest houses, that's easy to verify. It takes a day to verify. On the water shops, yes, you're right. This has come up, especially since yesterday. A lot of social media around the water shops. Canal Walk was especially mentioned, as well as Ultra Hypermarket. Staff have gone out and issued fines. If they continue trading, it will continue. What we're wanting to do is approach the business owner, because most of them are in a shopping facility. They're not metered individually. They're metered on a bulk meter. Go to the owners of the centres and say, this is not acceptable. Either you stop this, or we're going to have to cut the water flow to the facility to a much lower level, and the rest of your shops in the entire centre is going to suffer. You can sell municipal water if you've got a license from the city. If you're not, you have a problem. So the water inspectors are looking at it, and we'll get more information on this tomorrow. In terms of other enforcement, our staff has started Thursday in earnest, going to all the areas on both sides of the city, looking where there's been reports of car washes operating illegally and other facilities. We've hit about 37 fines on some of them. We've removed all the equipment, the generators, the hoses, the washing implements and everything. Guys been back yesterday to some of the places that were operating Thursday. They're not operating anymore. There is a lot of it, and we'll be doing this on a daily basis as we go along.
Thank you, Didi. Any other questions? Lady with a white t-shirt, then the lady behind her, and then Greg.
Craig Lee Smith from Eyewitness News. I just wanted to find out with regards to the schools in residential areas, what plans do you have in place for the schools?
That, again, that's a specific work stream that we have. We are working with the Department of Education. The head of our Disaster Management Centre met with the province's person coordinating the schools on Thursday. Greg, you might just want to give some prelim feedback on what your finding was.
So we met with the province's Department of Education, and they are basically have a plan in available that we will be implementing.
They will themselves report on that.
As far as possible, we've asked the schools to be self-sustaining, as well as the hospitals, and province has made a lot of progress in that regard, and they've given us some prelim indication. But again, that's a work stream. If you listen to what we're talking about, and it's a lot of your questions are very practical. Your questions are practical about queuing, length of time, what's going to happen. And our answers are being just as practical. So there are various work streams looking at the age, looking at schools, looking at hospitals. Greg attends the provincial disaster management meeting at the centre every week on a Friday, and we get an update from the provincial government as to what they're doing to make themselves sustaining, and also to keep their facilities open, which are also critical facilities. So there's a lot of effort going in there from government as a whole around making day zero and the hospitals especially, to making day zero as painless as possible, alternatively. And again, this should be the message. We need to push this out. We must push this out. The comment the lady made earlier about, you have tourists showering and people doing that. One understands the way the comment is made. The city's not blaming the residents. The city's saying, residents, we need to work together as a team, all of us, to save water. We are becoming a water scarce area, whether we like it or not. Go outside of Cape Town, go to Amanus and Overstein. They've been water scarce since 1999. The mindset of the residents in that area is totally different. We need to change the mindset. Climate change is a reality. We are seeing it. It's taken a longer time because it's a slow onset disaster. When we have a huge disaster like a fire or xenophobia, we all respond and in 6 months it's over. So we manage that easier. This is a longer term disaster. It's been a slow onset disaster that's come over a long period of time. We're not the only province that affected. The Northern Cape is also affected. And the Eastern Cape is becoming affected. Nelson Mandela's dams are at 30%. I got a call from the city manager yesterday asking me, can't we come and speak to them about some of the initiatives that we are launching for their public so they can also start the education. So almost the whole of the southern tip of South Africa has been affected by this. It is a definite indication of changes happening in our climate.
Thank you, Dee.
Hi, thanks. I'm Rebecca Weber. I write for a few publications in the U.S. I have 3 questions. One is, in terms of the density of the pods, will there be shorter distances for people to travel in poorer areas where people are less likely to have cars? Second, in terms of people that have boreholes, is there going to be restrictions or penalties against people using water for non-essentials, like that there are people who are still continuing to water their garden? And third, any plans for the airport closing or being restricted in any way, shape, or form? Thanks.
Okay, thank you then, Graham.
Okay, just wanted to ask about this. Obviously, a lot being said politically. Nomvula Mokonyane, the water minister, just told the Cape Town Press Club that I assume that Mayor Patricia de Lille, before her powers were stripped, issued a directive with Nomvula's department to procure a 10 MLD desalination plant, and that apparently that request now was just recently shelved in favour of groundwater availability. Can I just get some clarity on that, first of all, and then secondly, can you describe the relationship with the City of Cape Town and national government at this stage? A lot has been said, not very good, and Cape Townians are very concerned about that. Especially since Patricia de Lille's no longer spearheading things at the moment. And then secondly, just to add on again, a lot of people also asking pregnant women and, let's say, for example, a 65-year-old man or woman standing in the queue for water, will there be awnings, will they be protected from the sun? Just give a kind of a picture there. Thanks.
So yes, the city received a letter from the minister. If I forget the dates, I've just received copies of these yesterday, where she informed the city that she had instructed the Umgeni Water Board to provide us with a 10 megalitre day desalination plant, and we must find a place for it. Well, 4,000 square meters required at the V&A waterfront. Okay. The letter is very unclear, first of all, on timeframes. It's very unclear in terms of whether we're just getting a box with a desalination or whether this includes inlet and outlet, you know, whether we need to provide pipes to take the water out of the sea or whatever. So the mayor did respond. And the response was, well, you know, we are busy with another desalination plant at the V&A waterfront. Let's consider a different place for this, because we're already busy with one there. And I don't know, perhaps the wording of these letters has been miscommunication, but I'm not going to take this matter up. I think, you know, we welcome the offer from the Department of Water Affairs. 10 megalitres a day is not a great number, but, you know, 10 is you know, it's more than naught. But, you know, we would want to engage the Department of Water and Sanitation around this offer of exactly where it's located, what they are really offering us and what they're not offering us. I understand that. Let me say that the relationship with the department at an official level is very, very good. We have daily interaction between our bulk water department and the Department of Water Affairs locally. We've been engaging them on an ongoing basis virtually every day about what's happening with the dams, what's been released from the dams. Our big concern has been around the releases for agriculture. They are virtually at their limit now, and we have been very concerned that a limit of their allocation for the year. And we've been very concerned that this would be relaxed in some or other way, because that obviously would have a major impact on us. They have informed us that they have now ceased supply of water to the Lower Berg River Irrigation Board. They've maybe already have stopped supply to the Upper Berg River Irrigation Board, and very soon they will be curtailing supply to the other irrigation boards, such as the Teersvaderskloof Irrigation Board and so on. So, you know, at an operational level, there's I believe very, very good cooperation. So politically, I think what we need to distinguish between, if I can say, the political air war. The key issue here is for the city to say, well, there are constitutional responsibilities for every sphere of government, and we need to keep national government to account. You know, if the minister keeps saying correctly that they are responsible for water supply. So, Madam Minister, where is the water? That's the simple question. So, you know, the plans that they have there's been long outstanding plans, for example, for raising Voelvlei Dam and pumping water from the Berg River into Voelvlei Dam. That has not yet materialized. But nevertheless, I think in terms of what we now call the new normal, of giving recognition to the fact that when previously all the water supplies here in the Western Cape were based on surface water supply, an assumption that was adequate. I think the last 3 years drought showed us that the data we worked on before is just not sustainable going forward. We have to work on a different scenario for the future that has to include not only surface water supply, but other sources such as desalination, groundwater, water reuse. So the national department's strategy needs to also shift in that direction. They should be building 100 megalitre a day desalination plants. They should be, you know, building into their strategy a shift in approach, and not just proceeding only with the surface water projects. And we would just like to see some budget allocated. That's really all. If they, you know, we are happy to be the implementer of all of these if necessary. So, you know, for this crisis period now, certainly for this summer, it's unlikely anything that they implement are going to help us, but, you know, nevertheless, we still have next summer and the summer thereafter, and we don't know what the rainfall is going to be over the next few winters. It's important now that we have full cooperation and work together. So we will now continue our engagement with the Department of Water Sanitation, and I hope we can see in a very short period significant effort from their side in terms of significant action in terms of improving the bulk water supply here in the Western Cape.
To quickly respond to boreholes, so you would be mindful of the fact that the city has been very careful in its wording around the use of boreholes in our previous water restriction levels, including level 6, which we're currently at. We've said we discourage the use of boreholes for external and non-essential purposes such as topping up of swimming pools and irrigating gardens. We've purposefully been cautious around the wording because it is not our competency to limit the use of boreholes and well point water. This, once again, is within the Water Act and is the responsibility of the National Department of Water and Sanitation. But we have realized the need for municipalities to be empowered to take greater enforcement action in this particular area. And the city's Water and Sanitation Department wrote to the National Department of Water and Sanitation requesting greater limitation be placed on the use of boreholes and well point. And this has now resulted in the National Department of Water and Sanitation releasing a gazette on the 12th of January, which does now permit municipalities to exercise greater enforcement around the use of boreholes and well point. So in level 6B water restrictions, which will become effective from the 1st of February 2018, we once again indicate that the use of boreholes and well points should be for more essential purposes, such as flushing your toilets. If borehole or well point water is required for irrigation, such as vegetables, etc., that this be limited to a Tuesday and a Saturday before 9 a.m. in the morning and after 6 p.m. in the evening for a maximum of 1 hour. Furthermore, to align to the gazette that was issued by the National Department of Water and Sanitation, it will now become the responsibility of private property owners who have well points or boreholes to ensure that they have these fitted with meters, to ensure that there is record of usage for random inspections that the city will then carry out. And this is to once again emphasize the need to far more efficiently use this precious water resource and to ensure that we can take action against private property owners where they abuse this particular water source for non-essential purposes. So all of this is articulated in level 6B water restrictions, which comes into effect on the 1st of Feb.
Can I just pick up on the airport? I mentioned earlier in my presentation the airport's regarded as a key point. It won't be excluded. The service will continue. And in fact, AXA have made great strides in saving water. As you hit the airport, you know what the situation is. So they're also making great strides in becoming more water efficient and effective. And we've been very grateful for their cooperation so far.
Rebecca, your question around the density of the pods is a good one. When we release the full list of the 200 sites later this week, one of the statistics that you'll be able to see is the furthest distance that any person will have to travel in the city to get to a pod. I can tell you that from my experience with our city clinics, and we have half as many clinics or less as half as many clinics as we have pods, that no resident has to travel further than 5 kilometers in the city to get to a clinic, so that I'm anticipating residents not having to need to travel very far to get to any of the pods. But obviously there will be residents for even short distances of travel is difficult or awkward. And so, Graham, the answer is yes, there is some shade provided. And I think where a person can't queue or is too frail, there are enough hands on deck with each of the pods to help that person go and fill up their container and as such. And the managers at the pods will need to be a little bit flexible and use their discretion as they see the situation unfolds. You can't be too mechanistic in terms of managing the site.
Graham, same principle when you're at the voting booths. The officers see people in the queue or looking frail and we make arrangements around it. And I think we're going to ask people just to be a bit more comfortable and a bit more patient with those people, but that is the reality. I think the important thing is to manage the pods as best as possible, make the experience as unpleasant as possible and as painless as possible. But yes, at sometimes people get preference based on the physical condition they are in. As pleasant as possible. And again, Graham, I want to emphasize, on the old age homes, we are looking at delivering. There's a huge amount of people that have come forward. In fact, Alderman Nielsen will also be entering into discussions this week with some logistics company who are also stepping forward, and we can announce the details at a later stage.
Thank you very much, Edie. Are there any final questions before we wrap up? All right, good. The panel will be available for a short time for one-on-ones if you need them to be, and thank you very much as well for coming.
But just the last thing, just on Councillor Limburg's behalf, there was a gazette issued on Friday, 25th of January, by the city, indicating what the level 6B restrictions are. If you'd like to, we can make it available. It covers issues around use of balls, metering of balls, and some of the questions that you asked. It's quite a concise document. I've only taken out the relevant 3 pages out of the 86. If you wanted, we can make it available, and you can see what some of the national guidelines are also around balls and groundwater usage.
Just Kayleen and Nena at the back there. If you need any of this documentation, the email addresses for where people can, where organizations can write to volunteer their effort or their willingness to participate, or anybody who wants to make a donation.